start recording this into the cloud.
Recording in progress.
Yeah, everything goes into the cloud these days. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the quiz. How are you finding the quiz? This easier? A bit? Okay, good. Yes, this week we're going to, of course, microphone. Ooh. Anyone remembers what's the topic for this week? Not sure why this one doesn't work. Yeah, out of charge. Okay, may charge by the time we need it. Yes, this week we're going to focus on the political aspect of capitalism and see if the issue of democracy is going to have any future under capitalism, at least under the kind of format or variant of capitalism we are experiencing these days. And like the other weeks in the first half of the week, the first half of the semester, our focus will be, of course, on the misunderstandings, or if you like, the myths or ideologies that try to justify the kind of connection, a positive connection between democracy and capitalism. That the more you become more capitalistic, the more you will become democratic. And it's, I guess, the very obvious evidence for that is, well, you look at the capitalist societies, they are, of course, more democratic than non-capitalist societies throughout the history of capitalism and even today. So the more advanced your system is, especially the economic system, and the more capitalistic it is, the more people will enjoy democracy. And we would like to see if there is any truth or element of truth in that or not, and try to demystify some of things that we think are a little bit more complex to be captured by this kind of ideological or mythological understanding of the relationship. Now, we have two readings, and none of them are academic, but the first one is, the reason I chose was that because it was quite understandable for a very broad audience, and it's from a magazine, and the author does a very good job of explaining not only Trump, but also Trumpism as a movement and its socio-historical settings, the conditions that gave rise to Trumpism. The second reading is, again, not a peer-reviewed academic one. Half of that, if you might have already recognized, is an interview, but it's about another new book. You remember Piketty, and now this is another book, The Age of Surveillance Capital, by Shoshana Zuboff. And the author tries to introduce the book, the main ideas, and then the second half of that reading is a very interesting conversation between the author and the interviewer. And that's again another Guardian article. But before we get into the business of discussing the readings, again here is the myth or the ideology that economic liberalization brings about political liberalization, and of course the future of democracy would be very much dependent on the future of capitalism. We not only would like to look into the complexities behind this and question the idea. Our job is actually to promote critical thinking. And then also to see if we can actually come up with an alternative understanding of this relationship. Something like this, that for instance, capitalism may have contradictions, inbuilt contradictions, which makes the job of democracy difficult. And that relationship is not a pure love relationship. Maybe it's a mixture of love and hate. And it also depends on what definition of, we have tried to clarify what we mean by capitalism, but we also need to clarify what we mean by democracy, because people can come up with different understanding, different definitions of democracy, different expectations of democracy. For some people, just going to the polls and, dropping their votes every 3 or 4 years is more than enough in terms of their satisfaction with a democratic system. Whereas for other people, they want to be making more deliberative, more direct, and more embedded in daily activities, and not just elections, not just electoral democracy, but also maybe something deeper, like direct democracy or deep democracy. People have come up with different names for that kind of democracy.
I thought you were going to talk about the Unabomber there for a minute.
Sorry?
I thought you were going to mention the Unabomber there for some reason there for a moment.
I can't hear you, sorry.
I thought you were going to mention the Unabomber there for a minute.
Unabomber.
Ted, what's his name? Ted Kaczynski.
Oh, okay. I know, okay, well, we may get there. But anyway, so democracy, and then the alternative would be that if democracy is a good thing, and we are very proud of it, we want to actually export it to the rest of the world, democracy. Other people are backward because they don't have democracy, and in the name of democracy we fight bloody wars. So then why not at home also export democracy from the politics to other aspects of life, like economy, during the day, most of our days we spend them at work, like in workplaces. Most of our life, the productive lifespan is spent in workplaces, producing and doing economic things. So why not running every workplace in a democratic way? So that may be then another thing that would guide us into the realm of alternatives to the status quo. So last week, the myth, and you can see the parallels between this myth and the myth before. The last week's myth was that, the more economic liberalization, the more economic growth. Well, we questioned that, actually didn't come. But let's assume that economic liberalization results in economic growth. And then the idea was that then equality will come at the end, because the more prosperous your society is, the more you will be able to afford looking after equality and alleviating poverty. And then that doctrine was the trickle-down doctrine, which we questioned. Well, interestingly, the myth this week is also very similar to the myth in last week, because again, it's the idea is that don't worry about democracy now, just liberalize your economy, enjoy growth, become prosperous, and as the result of that, through a number of mechanisms that later we will discuss, your society will become more democratic. So democracy is the consequences of prosperity. And prosperity is the consequences of capitalism, especially a capitalism that goes wild in terms of being libertarian or liberalistic. So liberalism brings democracy. So we question that. We thought, okay, well, the evidence really doesn't back up that. There are two ways of dealing with reality. One way is just looking at the evidence as it appears to us, right? German philosophers did a very good job of debunking such an approach. You know, you look at the sun rises from where? The east, goes up in the middle of the sky, and then goes down in the west, and you think it's the sun turning around the earth, right? The evidence. It appears to us as if it's the sun that is turning around the earth. But you think more deeply and investigate more deeply, and you realize it's quite the opposite. It's the planet Earth that turns around the sun. So these are two different approaches. One approach would just say, look at the evidence that as it appears to you. You know, like Karl Marx. Karl Marx said, when we look at the exchanges, private exchanges, we think that the exchanges of the goods and commodities between people determine their prices, their values. But actually, when we look behind that, we see what? We see that it's actually the exploitation of the labor that is, and the resources, that is the main source of value in such a society, commodity society. The same here. I mean, we try to, that's our job. I mean, Albert Einstein said, if we could actually understand reality by looking at how it appears, I'm rephrasing, of course, I don't remember the exact wording, but then we didn't need science. We didn't need any science. So the same here. I mean, if we want to just look at the surface, possibly we don't need to come to the classes. But when we look behind things, we possibly can find more complexities. Now, I would like to see, again, if this idea or ideology that democracy is the consequences of prosperity would stand against facts and realities when we look more deeply. Now, again, there are many ways that the ideology is justified or constructed. Last week we became familiar with one of the founding fathers of New Liberalism, whose name was what? Milton Friedman. And now this is another father. Okay, he is Austrian, or he was Austrian. He lived long enough to be at the time to experience the time of the Nazi Germany, and so he came up with some ideas about how we can avoid totalitarianism, how we can avoid the rise of movements like Nazism or fascism, as it happened in Germany. And his solution was just to focus on the economy and to try to liberalize the economy. You look at Nazi Germany, you look at Stalinism and the Soviet Union, and you see the government is in absolute control of the economy, is in absolute control of everything. And as the result of that, I know you can possibly want to, yeah, okay.
Wasn't the term privatization initially coined to describe German economic policies around the Nazi Party? Because they allowed such massive deregulation, and they gave quite a lot of money to the rich capitalists. They were quite nice to them. It gave them a lot of political power.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you can say, it was corporate fascism, or it was corporate, it was different to Stalinism. I understand where you come from. Because in Stalinism or the Soviet, it was a statism.
Yeah.
The power was considered, yes, nationalized. Well, in the case of the fascism. So I don't want to get into the details of the differences, but yeah, you made a very good point. I wouldn't say privatized in a sense of libertarian, but they corporatized practically everything. So anyway, so his argument was that look at Nazi Germany, look at the Soviet Union and everything, the economy is in control, the state is, commands and so on and so forth, and that's the recipe for totalitarianism. So his idea was that something like this. Government control of economic lives amounts to totalitarianism. Economic control is not merely control of a sector of human life which can be separated from the rest, he wrote. It is the control of the means for all our ends. So why he concentrates on the economy, and whoever controls the economy controls everything. Now, if you talk to these new liberals, you will be amazed to hear that they believe actually society is part of the economy. Or it's kind of subsidiary to the economy. It's a secondary to the economy. Whereas in social sciences, and I think in common sense of everybody, even a primary schooler, economy is part of the society. It's not, economy bigger than society. But these guys, their worldview is like that. Its economy is everything. So whoever controls the economy controls everything. But ironically, such an ideology, both of them, this guy and Milton Friedman, this is Friedrich Hayek, ended up supporting dictators like Pinochet in Chile after the coup d'etat in 1973. Why is that? Why they ended up supporting the dictators? Yeah.
I guess the sharper ends of neoliberalism as an ideology. It comes up that limits of going supporting these people like Pinochet, and that it's of making sure that it's the market and the government never meet sort of thing. It's that absolute thing. So yeah, but it treads on everyone else.
Yep. In their ideology, or you can explain it in this way. In their ideology, they differentiate between liberalism and democracy. We normally think these two things are close or almost identical, right? Liberalism means democracy, democracy means liberalism. But in their views, liberalism is different to democracy. Liberalism means private property, individual freedom, but individual freedom practically is reduced to private property. When people have the right to their own properties, that means they are free. They're individually free. It's not about the freedom of expression or the freedom of the political freedom or freedom of association and so on and so forth. For them, democracy is kind of a good thing, desirable, but, well, democracy could be dangerous. So if that happens, therefore that democracy is a bad thing. It's not a good thing. And in such a case, when people decide to go for less privatization, more regulation, then maybe a coup d'etat would be justified, just like a reset button, right? So that explains why these guys, the founding fathers of neoliberalism, ended up supporting a guy like Pinochet. So in the name of liberty, but for the sake of private property. That's what they practically, their ideology translates. So, like Milton Friedman, he supported that coup and the dictatorship in the economic reforms after that coup, and then he said, I have not been able to find a single person, even in much maligned Chile, who did not agree that personal freedom was much greater under Pinochet than it had been under Allende. Allende was the president who was overthrown by the coup. He was not communist. I mean, they used that as an excuse. He was a social democrat. He was not really a communist. And that coup, 1973, was kind of modeled, I believe, based on another coup that happened in 1953. Anyone knows about that coup? 1953? It was the coup against a democratically elected prime minister and government in Iran, my country. And why they did that? Well, because he dared to nationalize the Iranian oil and kick the British out. Initially, they wanted 50-50 with the British, and that was too much. So the British petroleum, Iranian British petroleum, that is now BP, Iranian English Petroleum, something like that, which is now BP, and I don't go to BP. They actually staged a coup in collaboration with the United States. Later in 1990s, I think Galbraith apologized to Iranians for that coup. Too late, too little. But why they did that? Well, because they nationalized the oil, and then they tried to remove the government by boycotting, by actually putting sanctions. So the Iranians couldn't sell one drop of oil for 2 years. They were under embargo. But the prime minister managed to actually run the economy very well. He started with kind of a budget deficit. He came up with positive deficit because that time Iran was not completely dependent on oil. Oil was just recently discovered. The British and the Americans didn't really need to do the coup because they recently found oil in Arab countries. They could just say, okay, fine, just nationalize your oil. But then they were so scared because every other country wanted to nationalize their oil. So they wanted to make a good lesson out of that for the rest of the world. And then the reason, and there was another reason that is mostly ignored, is that because that government, that democratic government, managed to run the economy without depending on oil, the prime minister came up with this motto. And what was that? Much more dangerous than the nationalization of the oil. It was the economy without oil. And imagine in 1953, that idea would have been spread to the rest of the world. We wouldn't have been in this mess in terms of climate change, right? Running economies without being dependent on fossil fuels. You see that it was too dangerous to be tolerated. But you see that this ideology only works when it works for the rich. So individual liberty, when you hear individual liberty or give the economy to the people, by people they don't mean you and me, because you and me are not going to buy more than 50 or 60% of, I don't know, electricity generation in a country, or own 30, 40, 80% of the grid, or I don't know, the transport or the hospitals and so on and so forth. By that they mean those who can afford buying them. So individual liberty for Hayek means private property rights protected by the law from the state interference. And they call it negative freedom. It's the opposite of positive freedom. What is negative freedom? What is positive freedom? Anyone knows about that? Heard about that? Well, negative freedom is that you're left to do whatever you like. Right? So just leave the market to itself. Don't interfere. Leave the rich to themselves. Leave the individuals to themselves. Don't interfere. Don't regulate them. Minimize regulation and so on. So that's a negative freedom. A positive freedom is when actually you assist someone to achieve their goals. So in some kind you are interfering to help some. For instance, a society decides to go for policies and regulations that would promote equality, higher quality, and so on and so forth. These are positive freedom. You see, there's a kind of interference to help someone or some group of people achieve their goals. They believe positive freedom is bad. You shouldn't go for positive freedom. You cannot guide anyone to to paradise. But you should go for negative freedom. Leave them alone. They find their own way. Well, that makes sound maybe right, but that means no interference, no
I
regulations.
was just thinking about when you talk about negative freedom, like laissez-faire.
Exactly.
Economics, how in time in England back in industrial age when they were colonising India and that, how there was barely any oversight and it's just letting them get away with so much, like starving the people and changing how they lived and that, how they supported themselves.
Yeah, and normally with negative, you start with negative freedom. You allow competition, privatization, monopolies grow, monopolies go bust, and then you have to interfere finally, as Obama did. Too big to fail. Yeah.
This idea of Hayek seems to be very narrow and only for the rich. But do we know what Hayek posits for the poor people? What's going to happen to them?
Well, we discussed that in not with Hayek, but Milton Friedman. Yes, who had this almost the same ideology. That when the society becomes prosperous, it trickles down to the poor people.
But it doesn't.
No, of course not. So because the rich always have tax havens to take their money to. Now, there are, of course, other ways of justifying the myth. For instance, more economic liberalization would result in the rise of the middle class. And what would middle class would like to have? Democracy. Okay, so your society becomes more prosperous, you will have more middle class. More middle class means more higher values. They have satisfied their basic needs already, so then say, what about our freedom? Freedom of expression, freedom of political participation, and so on and so forth. So they would promote more democracy. This is again based on a very, very terrible misunderstanding of the history of the West, because most of the time they refer to the history of the West. Well, look at these advanced societies. They first satisfied their basic needs, they became rich, and then they went for democracy. So the same should happen for the rest of the world. The same path should be followed for the rest by the rest of the world. Possibly you have come across with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Have you heard of that? People normally satisfy their basic needs and then they go for the higher levels of needs, more abstract needs, which is not really applicable anywhere. You go to many third world societies, you see many poor people, poor families actually sacrifice their basic needs in order to send their kids to the schools for education, which is a higher need. Yeah.
I just had a question. Does this theory then, I suppose, say that if you have more money, then your opinions are more valued, so therefore that's why it's more democratic? Like when the middle class is, like now there's a rise in the middle class, they get to now have an opinion, but why couldn't they have an opinion before? Is that?
That's another way of justifying. I'll get to that. That's another way. But yes, that could be another way. $1, one vote. We will get there. Yes. So why this is a terrible misunderstanding? Well, because when you look at the history of the West, you see that actually it was democracy that came first, and then prosperity and welfare. How come? What happened? Anyone remembers? Maybe some of the things from the history classes about. Have they covered labor movements? Yes.
They have the French Revolution, which kind of takes a place that is hyper segmented into the super wealthy, which is royalty or nobles and whatever, and basically everyone else. And so democracy was established to kind of spread out that wealth more evenly. So it was kind of democracy was necessary for more economic liberalization and not such like that.
Yes, I mean, you can say that. It was the French Revolution failed multiple times, but the trajectory was what you just said.
Right.
And then later in the rest of the West, the United States, you come to closer to the end of the 19th century, you come closer to the beginning of 20th century, you see the uprising by the movements, by the labor movements, by the working class. Many of them were actually immigrant women, and we keep ignoring, we think always that, the worker was always a male figure. And so the first wave of the feminism and the second wave. So these movements after movements actually tried to push for more democracy. And when the labor gained the rights to vote, gained the rights to have the unions and rights for associations and so on and so forth, then they actually could achieve, as you said, a better redistribution of wealth, a higher level of the welfare, and the working class became the middle class. So the middle class was born out of these movements that craved for more democracy, better redistribution of the rights and opportunities.
That creation of middle class and then enfranchising some of the workers that were deemed proper to represent, like, guard that sort of space between the proletariat and the upper class, like keeping them away. It's like, what was I going to say? It's it's an enfranchisement of sort of buying their position, like saying you can have some land, you can have a voice, but it's not as significant as ours because you still can't. You still, you can't pay for it and all that as we can. It's sort of like it's still that ideological position.
Yeah, well, initially those rights to vote were just dedicated to only those who had the property, but then it was spread more. So it's, so you see that it was the opposite. It was first the movements, first democracy, higher levels of democracy, then more prosperity, then the middle class, the rise of the middle class. But you look at China. Well, in the case of China, you see the rise of the middle class, yes. We know that was not because of new liberalism. As we explained last week, Chinese didn't adopt a kind of full-fledged new liberalism. They mixed up some market-friendly policies with their own estate-centric politics. And then they experienced, several decades of growth and also the rise of the middle class. But that middle class that comes out of such a process, not through protests and movements, doesn't seem to have a very strong commitment to democracy. So in fact, you can say, well, why not looking at China, the poster child of reform, and see that actually the middle class is not interested in democracy. So that would debunk that ideology, right? That justification. Well, as soon as they get rich, they send their kids out, for education, and then they accumulate more wealth, and then they join their kids and then move out. Or they live a pretty materialistically satisfied life, and they're not very much interested in democracy. Yes?
I was just going to say how these artificially created middle classes in these global south countries sort of overlooked when you're discussing the dynamics of things like class and that in these sort of developing countries. So it's assumed that they're all poor, and it's not like there isn't that antagonism between the haves and have-nots and who's getting the wealth from that.
Yeah, I love that phrase, artificially made middle classes. Okay.
So could we say succinctly that a middle class in China is more toward Hayek's theory of economic growth, not necessarily rights growth, like the Western nations. For example, when we had the suffragette movement for the vote for women, when we had the unions that were putting what would we call it, extra wages. It's a different type of rise of middle class.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. Another justification is that when you go for more neoliberalism, it means you end big government, it will be a smaller government, and that gives more space for the non-governmental organizations to play a role, and so on and so forth. And this would increase the level of democracy and freedom. Another justification is that, you know, is related to the information and communication technologies. ICTs stands for that here. And more freedom of information, more technology, more advanced technology, and therefore more democracy. The second reading about Zuboff's book, I think, would do a very good job of debunking that one, that actually technology is not being very much monopolized and used against the citizens in order to make money out of their daily experiences, turning their daily experiences into commodities and so on and so forth. When the internet came, I remember it was, I think it was in the 1990s, mid-1990s, and we were so happy, wow, with that. I mean, so far it's been only mass media, corporate media talking to us. Now everybody can talk to everybody. But then we realized that we were in a very large room and it was too noisy, and actually internet started to tribalize us into groups of like-minded people, the far righters and then the far leftists and the ones in the middle. They only talk to each other because they hate talking to the other groups. So didn't really actually showed that our dreams were going to be realized. And then, yes, the more economically advanced, the more politically advanced, the state economic role will become more democratic if it does not contradict the laws of the free market. And therefore, there is no alternative, as Thatcher said. TINA, T-I-N-A, there is no alternative to this. This is the way forward. Again, other types of justifications they're very much embedded in the conversations. You turn on any commercial TV, you go into social media, and you see that people have already internalized and digested these things, and constantly on daily basis, we are bombarded with this kind of justifications. You know, this consumer vote, you know, the winner versus the loser. You know, if we model the politics based on the market, therefore, this is another justification that, you know, we should expand the neoliberalism from the economy to the politics in a way that if we model or reconstruct the politics the way that we construct the market, therefore politics becomes more democratic. If you look at the way that we run the politics, you see the parallels between the politics as a realm and the economy or the market. You know, in the market, you know, it's, you know, all private actors transacting and interacting with each other. And, well, think of KFC and McDonald's. You hate KFC, you dislike it, the quality has dropped. You punish them by not going there, not spending your money there, and going to the McDonald's, spend your money there, enjoy the sandwiches, and then by the way that you spend your money, you are voting, right? You are voting, and therefore the person or the company that fails to satisfy the needs of the customers will be punished. And we do the same in politics. And who are the ones that are equivalent to the corporations in the politics, in the political system? The corporations of the political system that compete with each other, and they offer their sandwiches in the form of policies, solutions. Political parties, yes. Political parties are our McDonald's and KFCs and so on and so forth. So they're the ones that come up with their own solutions to our problems. Here is the list of my policies. If you vote for me, every year as a household, you can save $500 on childcare. And the other one comes with another, offering. And then depends on how they satisfy people. People would, of course, vote for or against. There's a government in power, they mess up, you hate a ScoMo, you go for Albanese, and vice versa. So there is always a competition modeled based on the economy, and people vote, and this way they can fix the problem. If there is a bad apple like Trump, and Trump mess ups, well, we get rid of Trump, we replace him with Biden. Biden will mess up, we'll replace him with someone else, maybe again Trump again. So you see, this way of understanding, but you don't see much of a difference between McDonald's and KFC. The same with the major political parties. And you see that most of the economy, most of the market is highly monopolized by the corporations. And you see that in the politics, the market of the politics, or the market of political policies or political ideas, is also very much monopolized by major parties. The ones that, and you've not satisfied the major parties, go ahead and set up your own political party. Good luck. So this is this is the way that these things are justified. Yes. So James Buchanan, based on public choice theory, argues that the individuals make their decisions rationally based on their own self-interest, not need for the government to decide what is in their interest, and so on and so forth. Yep. So the politics should be modeled based on free market. Political parties are the suppliers of solutions and policy changes, and citizens are their consumers. When for any reason the demand for a specific way of running the system increases, the party that can satisfy the demand will be the winner. But like in the free market, where monopolies grow, as I just said, in such a capitalist political system, the major parties behave like KFC versus McDonald's, offering the same paradigm while exaggerating their differences to create a delusion of free choice. There is a website, I think I had already introduced at the Next System, and they did a very good job. There's a very interesting report about the index of systemic brain that they show actually in the case of the United States, and you can generalize that pretty comfortably to the rest of the Western world, advanced world, and also any other society that has actually adopted the same system. Regardless of what major party has been in power, the trends have been always towards, things getting worse and worse. You look at the index of inequality, you look at the climate change, you look at the corruptions, and so on and so forth. There's a list of indicators that show that actually there has been a trend, constant trend, in terms of the demise of democracy, democratic legitimacy, union memberships, the memberships of even political parties, and so on and so forth, inequality, wages stagnations, and so on and so forth. The precaritization or casualization of the workplaces or workforces, and that actually the conclusion is interesting, that democracy cannot be delivered by a system that undermines it in the first place. Since the winners in the free market economy can always use their power and resources to influence the state and the politics. Economic power is as strong as political power, if not less potent. $1, one vote issue is that thing. And if you're interested, you can Google that term, Citizens United, which was adopted in the United States years ago, which allows the companies to donate money. And it's interesting, when the election season comes, it's the season of investment for corporations. So these corporations work very well with their counterparts, the political parties in the politics. And it's interesting to see that, for instance, you see corporations are donating to both sides of the politics. You know, whoever wins, you know, they would look after us. So, and this is democracy, right? This is the kind of democracy we have. In an excessively competitive economy, markets tend to become chaotic due to the lack of a structure, almost impossible to plan. Therefore, big business uses its power to inject certainty to the system. Why they do this? It's not just, I think that's another important point to make here, I would like to make. It's not just the corporations want the politicians to look after their interests when they are elected into the office. It's something bigger than that. And what is that? Imagine that you live in a society that is, or in an economy that is by and large highly privatized, highly competitive. And everybody is left to themselves to compete and seek more and more profit. In such a situation, what would describe the ability of the players in predicting the future? Highly competitive, everybody is trying to maximize their profit. And
a lot of things like creativity and that would stagnate. Like, it wouldn't go anywhere because it's just that constant have to keep up and going, and there's no end.
well, you imagine that you're allowed to, and you can afford, you know, as much as you can to go for more creativity, maximize your productivity against others, the interests of the others. What would describe your ability to predict and plan in such a situation? Yes?
I don't have an answer to that question.
Oh, sorry.
Say something different.
Okay. Well, it becomes so, yes?
It becomes really difficult to plan, like, because you can't really predict what's going to happen when so many forces are competing together.
Exactly. Perfect. Well done. It would be almost impossible to plan. So what is the solution then? To make things a little bit more certain for yourself, if you have the power to do that. Yes. So you try to influence the politics, you try to increase your power, your monopoly. So the solution is to to become a monopoly. And of course you need a partner. And who is that partner? The state. So buy the politician, buy the political party, have them on your side, try to increase your influence. So you see, my friend, we start with freedom, competition between even equal players. We'll end up in having monopolies. And you see that it's inbuilt in the system that does not promote democracy and equality in the first place, right? And therefore, it is again looking behind the surface. The surface says, well, let everybody compete. Therefore, there will be freedom and everybody will end up playing equally, but that's not going to happen. Yeah.
I just thought I'd let you know that the sound isn't coming through the microphone you're holding. It's picking up the sound at the front. So when you walk away from the desk, there's no sound for the people on the Zoom, just so you know.
Oh, really? So I should stay here?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay.
I just noticed when you walked away from the desk,
Yes.
the sound cuts out completely
Oh,
on the Zoom. So, yeah.
okay. So you're listening to the Zoom?
I needed to get a coffee, so I was listening to the Zoom when I was getting
I see. Okay, well, thank you so much. Well, I hope Alex didn't have that problem. Alex, could you hear as well? To see that I can see some of the... Okay, yes. We lost sound, sorry. Okay, I hope that later you can listen to the recordings for those parts. I'm sorry, I missed the comments. It would be great if you guys can unmute yourself, because I'm kind of unassisted in terms of looking after the messages you put there. I apologize for that, I didn't realize. Okay, so I stay as close as possible. So, how can I get this microphone to you?
This whole thing looks like a
Yep.
giant chess game, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You get to thinking, oh yes, there's democracy here, that's great. And then a big company becomes a monopoly and, oh, foiled again.
Yep. Yeah, it's like the snake and ladder, right?
Yeah.
This is another quote from a book that explains or expresses what we just said. You know, the chaotic nature of the market when they're left to themselves and unregulated or underregulated would everybody, even neoliberals, a lot of them now acknowledge that it's some level of regulation is always needed. I mean, and they ended up doing that, when Obama tried to save the system by saying that these companies are too big to fail. Too big to fail. And therefore, he ended up giving socialism to the rich. He gave them a lot of money. Our money, the taxpayers' money, that had to be paid back by generations after generations. So it's always like in a capitalist system, it's always socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. So it's always, there's always, there is no politician there has never been a politician that would dare to go down the path of neoliberalism and privatize everything and deregulate everything, because it's very obvious they will be kicked out of the office. But they do it gradually. They do it gradually to satisfy the monopolies in the market. Yeah, like the trickle down that has never happened. This idea that in future will improve democracy as the result of prosperity resembles that one, and you can consider this as a political trickle down, if you like. The economic is political, and we should then raise the question of who must control the process and in whose interest. And the political freedom cannot be postponed or made dependent on economic progress. Last week we realized that it is actually not in favor of capitalism to ignore equality. What does that mean? It means that you need some level of what? Regulations. And what regulation means? Politics, right? So the politics is always embedded in the economy. So last week's conclusion guides us to this week's discussion, that politics is important. And therefore it cannot be left alone. It's not like politics is a separate thing from the economy, despite the fact that these neoliberals want us to believe in. They want to separate politics from the economy, but it's interesting that politics should not interfere in the economy, but the economy can actually interfere in politics through those donations and influences. And it's the issue of what type of democracy we want. Now the solution in terms of now that the regulation is important, now that we have to fix the politics to fix the economy, the question is that then what type of solution, what type of alternative we have? How should we do these regulations? There are different models, and one model is what? The Chinese model, right? According to the Chinese model, they mixed up some economic, market-friendly policies with their own way of estatism, and the state stayed in commanding the heights of the economy, and the banking system is public, the education is still public, a lot of it. and so on and so forth. So they took an authoritarian way of guiding a market economy. That some people call it market socialism, some people call it neo-mercantilism, and so on and so forth. And it's not actually a new model. It's not something that the Chinese invented. If you look at the history of the Western capitalism during especially their imperialistic and colonialistic era, you see that it was almost the case. It was the government looking after the interest of the economy and guiding the economy, adopting policies in terms of imports and exports, supporting their own infant industries against the influences and competitions, external competitions. And China is just simply following the same model. And that can explain why the Chinese have interest in land grabbing in Africa, land grabbing in Latin America, in expanding their influence. It's the nature of capitalism. It should expand, otherwise it will die. And the best partner for that, the best contributor or actor for that is the state. It's the state that helps the corporate economy to expand. And the stronger the state is, the stronger the corporate sector will be. And now, with the new technology in the hands of the state and the corporations, and we have this story of surveillance capitalism as grasped by Zuboff. The second, and we know that it has lots of problems. It's the dark side aspect of the Chinese model. The ecological crisis, corruption, violation of human rights. Do we want them as well or not? The second option is, of course, a Scandinavian and nice social democratic model that we experienced in the middle of 20th century. We discussed that, and we said that, well, it has, of course, a lot of benefits, but it also has its own problems and obstacles and impediments and so on and so forth. For social democracy to work, you need almost every other country on board. Because if you tighten your regulations, put some taxation, the capital is going to fly, and so on and so forth. It has become more difficult, yes, these days, for capital to fly out and punish you because you wanted more tax, but it's the case, and you need to have everybody on board. That covenant, that convention, that international agreement could only be achieved after World War II, when every nation was totally destroyed. And then we came to this conclusion that we should, cooperate, and then nationalization was high in the agenda. The nationalization of the economy. So in that situation, it worked, but the current situation seems to be very different. Do we really need to go for another World War III, to come to that conclusion? Imagine Bernie Sanders would win, or someone like Bernie Sanders would win the elections, or someone like Jeremy Corbyn would win the elections. As soon as they want to implement social democratic and welfare state policies, they would face massive resistance unless other countries are on board. In the current situation, we don't see that agreement happening. We see quite the opposite. It's the polarization of the international politics. The Russians versus Americans, the Chinese versus Americans.
What do we mean by surveillance capitalism?
Second reading.
Oh. Okay.
Yes, that's the subject of the second reading.
Right.
Yeah, we'll try to find some time, hopefully today, to discuss the readings. I should be a little bit faster. As a footnote, we normally think that these things that happen today, this polarization, populism, this ethnocentrism is something new, and then we get so disappointed. And sorry, you had a question, right?
I was just going to say how things like the war on drugs and war on terror and all that have been new forms of accumulating and capital to build it up again.
Yes, yeah. And we think that these things are pretty new, and we get so disappointed. Where did Trump come from? But there were they have always been the case. I mean, it's this, obsession with political correctness was pretty new. It was not always the case. I mean, there were times where the politicians that we still may think of them as our saviors, had the chance to openly express their views. And this is, for instance, one of them. This is from Churchill. He said, "The government of the world must be entrusted to satisfied nations who wished nothing more for themselves than what they had." So the satisfied nations are the superpowers, the UK, the Europe, the America. And if the world government were in the hands of hungry nations, there would always be danger. But none of us had any reason to seek for anything more. The peace would be kept by peoples who lived in their own way and were not ambitious. I mean, these superpowers are not ambitious at all. Our power placed us above the rest. And this is the mentality after World War II, when we started building the United Nations. Our power placed us above the rest. We were like rich men dwelling at peace within their habitations. Okay, so you see that Trump is not new. And he was racist, yeah, Churchill. I mean, I'm from the Middle East, and I have lived long enough to remember Reagan when he was elected to the office, and Thatcher. And Reagan was the Trump of our time. And we were saying, could someone be more stupid than this guy when he was opening his mouth? And we waited until George Bush the father came, and we said the same question. And then we waited until the son came, and we said the same question. And then we waited until Trump came, and we asked the same question. And we will keep asking the same question, I guess.
That's also that problem of over-relying on the personality to sell everything.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
came with people like Reagan and all that, is that reliance on them selling that
Yes.
sort of personality and trustworthiness as
Yeah,
as themselves.
Yeah, running the politics like you run the market, advertisement, that figure, that picture. Yeah.
You don't know, and also when it comes to the politics, their interests, you don't quite know because they've made it part of them so much.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, if you're interested in knowing what sort of beast China is, I would recommend this one. This is part 1, I guess. And there must be part 2 as well. And these two are the giants in the world of a scholarship around this topic. One is a person I know more closely, Patrick Bond, who contributed a chapter to our handbook. And this one is Michael Hudson, very, very famous. They have their own different views about what kind of system China is. Now, let's take a step back. I think that's important. And reflect on what we learned in week 2 and week 3. And see if we can apply that to the subject of this week. In week 2, if you remember, we concentrated on the nature of capital. We wanted to see what exactly capital or capitalism is. And if you remember, we said that capital is not a thing. By thing we mean what? Wealth, money. It's not just a thing, right? And it's about the relationships, especially power relationships, the division of labor, and so on and so forth, that are shaped around the ownership and control over that thing. Okay, whoever owns and controls that thing and the production of that thing would of course have the upper hand in the social relationships. So capital is about the process of accumulation, the control over that process, the means of that process, and the ownership of that process and the relationship that are formed around it. Now, that was the takeaway, right? And so it's not about the and it's more than that. It's not about the appropriation of the value that is produced. And normally when we talk about value, we mean the capitalist value, the commodity value. We define value from the capitalist perspective. You know, all these things that are around us and we use them, the car, the machinery, the buildings, everything, they have the value. We consider them as value. So it's not about the appropriation of value as most of the scholars and activists think of. It's more than that, as we try to argue. It's also about how to define what value is. You may come up, you talk to an indigenous person and they would tell you, they don't care about this, sophisticated buildings. They would like to live in nature. They value nature more than these sophisticated technological things that are surrounding us, right? So the value, it depends on the worldview and the perspective. So it's not an epistemological question that some of us, the intellectuals and the philosophers and the students come together and think about what value is. It's actually something people are fighting for on the ground. When the indigenous people defend their own lifestyles, their existence, their right to live, the right of the Mother Earth or the right of the nature, when people argue for care and love to be valued, and they're fighting for it on the ground. So it's not just an intellectual or epistemological thing. So that was the takeaway from week 2. And then week 3, we applied that to week 3. So if we consider that capital is not a thing, right? Then when we come to analyze inequality, we cannot be like Thomas Piketty, right? Thinking of inequality as if it's a disparity between top 20% versus bottom 80%, as if this top 20% have no class consciousness, no class agenda. The bottom 80% are just a bunch of people put together, right? It's not like, the top 1% versus 99% as the Occupy movement claim. It's more than that. So if you consider capital as not a thing, you realize that you cannot reduce inequality to these numbers, the disparities between percentiles, the people above a percentile versus the people below a percentile.
That's the crux of why the Occupy movement didn't succeed as it would have, because it had no real political agenda. It wasn't very political. It was like representing everyone, and everyone got a voice, and it's like it doesn't quite work like that.
Yes, you can say one of the reasons that it didn't achieve much was that it was not very much thinking deeper than this, right? It didn't go deeper than Piketty.
It was just focusing on the haves and have-nots.
Yeah, exactly. Very good point. So this is and then we said this is just a symptom, that these disparities are just a symptom. It cannot be fixed by some policy changes, although policy changes might be good for some time if we can achieve them. Then if you may remember, the conclusion was something like this. We can actually reinterpret the history. For Marx was, the history was the conflict between classes, between the haves and have-nots. But especially the working class and the upper class, the capitalist class, the bosses versus the workers, or the employers versus the employees. But then we said, well, we can actually expand that. We can adopt another kind of wording that would include what Marx said, but it would also, as Nancy Fraser said, it can also include other forms of struggles, other forms of conflicts. Like, for instance, so by using the words like value makers versus value takers, and then value makers could be those who are involved in housework, care work, effective work, if you may like. The nature itself does the work, a lot of work. Bees also work, right? So the work of the nature, there are the value makers, and who are the value takers. So that is struggles between value makers and value takers. That would expand the scope of the struggle. So we can incorporate feminist or women's rights movements, we can incorporate environmentalist movements that fight for the rights of the environment, and so on and so forth, and other minorities. So you see that, but that conflict is still not enough from my point of view, because it is still about the distribution of value. And what value is that? The value that we produced under capital. That, for instance, the woman who does the housework should also get a portion of the wage, or should be waged by the government, which I have no problems with that. But we're still fighting within the realm of capital and capitalism over what capital produces through us. And we say, where is my share? That's not fair. I want a fairer distribution of what we have produced. But the other fight that we have to concentrate is that, what should be actually valued? Wait. Let's stop and think about what should be valued, what type of value we want to produce. And that's a $1 million question that now we have to start to raise. And that's a question that actually pushes us beyond capitalism. If we want to end capitalism, go beyond capitalism, if we want to think of alternatives, the alternatives should be significantly and meaningfully be different to capitalism. It can't be capitalism in other ways. So then, not only the definition of value, I added another thing here. That is the foundational structure of the value regime. The way that we produce that new value is important. I now try to clarify this for you, to tell you why I put that part, the structure of the regime. Yeah, that was Piketty. Yes. Yeah, I mean, this summarizes what I just said. You apply that again to week 4, and then the problem is that we are now suffering not only from socioeconomic inequality, but also democratic deficit and legitimacy crisis. I have some charts in the end. If you have time, you can look at them. That actually democracy has been in decline all across the world, even in the heartlands of democracy, like the U.S. And then again, we need to concentrate on the issue of value makers versus value takers, and how to define value. People have come up with different solutions, different alternatives, and here's a list of them. You can pick up one of them for your essay, whatever interests you towards the end of the semester. Some people want to bring the old responses back and reinvent them, like new social democracy, like universal basic income, ecological social democracy, like Green New Deal, new socialisms, new forms of socialism, socialist feminism, anarchisms, all sorts of all these are being reinvented. There are groups that try to bring them back, reflect on what went wrong, try to fix them, and reinvent them as a solution, as an alternative. There are also new inventions, new responses under new titles. They also have elements from the past. They're not completely new, but they are wrapped in new terms. Solidarity economy, democratic eco-socialism, degrowth, post-growth, eco-anarchism, eco-feminism, ecological democracy, blah, blah, blah. Buen vivre is something that is indigenous. Some of you might be interested. I don't know if I put democratic confederalism of the Kurdistan. That's another very interesting one if you like. And then, for instance, this one, like care-centered politics and care economy. I would like to focus on this one, for instance, to clarify what I meant by the defining value and the value regime. Now, there are books recently written about, care-centered politics and care economy. These are the principles of such an approach, that now we have to value care over profit, over economic growth, over GDP. You may talk about, some people talk about happiness or well-being, or I prefer the word well-living because well-being has been very much watered down. So, these are the principles. Recognition of the value of care, redistribution of care responsibilities, valuing and supporting care workers, encouraging community-based care, ensuring access to affordable care, addressing inequalities and social justice, building a sustainable care system, and so on and so forth. You can have a look at some of the rest of these sentences. You see, these are beautiful ideas. They try to value something different than profit, than money, than wealth, than the material things, commodities. And this is one of the interesting books. I mean, if you're interested, you may have a look at that one. And there is a book review that I adopted this sentence from. Yes, I mean, the question is that then is it possible to make capital caring, a caring being? Is it another policy solution, or we need to completely get rid of capitalism to go for care as a value, a care-centered economy? How capitalistic a care-centered economy is? And normally these books don't really get into the details of how we can actually how we can resolve or address the contradictions that such agenda creates within a capitalist system, a system that is built to pursue profit. Otherwise it would die and result in contradictions, conflict, resistance. I've been a member of the union in this university for last 12 years. Every 3 years we go into fight for another 3 years to reach an enterprise agreement. It's a constant conflict, a nightmare. We have to go and sacrifice our salaries to go on strikes. We cannot go on strikes when the enterprise agreement is not disputed, and so on and so forth. So it's this system, when you want to fix it, when you want to make it more humane, when you want to civilize it, it resists. And the history of capitalism is the history of conflicts between labor and capital, between ecology and the economy. It creates dualities, and these dualities, these dichotomies, are in constant fight, and lots and lots of resources are wasted for these conflicts. For instance, the management of the university decides not to go for the negotiations and conclude the negotiations, and then they offer an alternative solution or agenda to the staff by bypassing the union, and then they invest lots of our resources in doing that, and then of course the staff rejects that, and then they have to come back to the negotiation table, and years after years our energies and our resources are wasted. So this is just one small example of how, when you want to fix the system, the resistance from the system actually ruins. Yeah?
One of the biggest solutions for making caring capital and valuing it is political policy and laws. Enshrined laws that make caring valuable will always be there, and you then have something that's a certainty if you get it into laws. And a lot of this is regulated by law, which we're probably not aware of. I am, but we're probably not aware of as a whole. That we can use a lot of our laws to say, hang on, this is valuable. Yeah. And we want to be compensated for it.
Yes. And how many centuries of fight has gone into that to make sure that we get numerous? Yes. Yeah. And did we need that? Why not ending all those conflicts? Thanks. And why not democratizing the entire system? For instance, imagine that this university would have been run like a cooperative rather than like a corporation. In that case, all the decision would have been made by groups of staff and students bottom up, right? We didn't need to have any fight. And as a group, we were looking after our own interests and make sure that we won't go bankrupt. We could adopt any sorts of managerial system that would look after that. But that would have been by us deciding. You know, many cooperatives, when they go bankrupt or face any financial crisis, instead of making people redundant, let's say, for instance, out of 5 people, 4 of them reduce their availability to protect the 5th job, the job of the 5th person. So it is. This is it makes huge difference. It avoids a lot of conflicts. So now, if you go for this, there would be some questions to answer. You know, profit motive versus care. Capitalism operates on profit motives, which means that the ultimate goal is to maximize profits. This often conflicts with the goal of providing care to the people. For example, in a care-centered capitalist economy, companies providing care services may need to charge higher prices to cover the cost of providing quality care, which may not be affordable to everyone. So what is the solution? Well, we have to beg the government to invest. And what if government is running, budget deficit? Well, because they're not taxing the rich, enough to make up for that money. And the rich resist that taxation. Private ownership versus care. Capitalism is based on private ownership of resources and the means of production, which creates a barrier to providing care as a public good. Private owners may prioritize profit over providing care, leading to lack of access to care for marginalized groups. Inequality versus care. Capitalism is inherently unequal, with wealth and power concentrated in the hands of a few. This often leads to inequalities, and so on and so forth. You see this, I just wanted to highlight the contradiction that would emerge. I mean, I'm not against, making capitalism a kind of a caring creature. We have to go for it, especially in the absence of more radical solutions. But we need to be aware that this has been, as you said, going on for centuries. And it's a constant fight. It's a constant fight. And constant contradictions in the system. Because we're trying to, as Zuboff says, let me reword that because I didn't like this example. The example I like to use is that you're begging a tiger to become vegetarian. And you're in constant fight with that tiger.
How could you make capitalism caring when they've tried that and all the contradictions make it difficult to make it that sort of defanged beast? Yeah, that's a $1 million question. Again, I'm not against the efforts that we make. I vote for the political parties that would try to civilize the system, but I think it's far from enough. We have gone that path multiple times over a very long period of time, and considering the accumulation of huge crises that we see, especially the ecological one that we deal with next week, it's time to go beyond the conventional wisdom. So that's why I believe that the way that the value regime is. So I think for care as a true value, for love, for the ecological well-being, whatever you want to value, except profit, except wealth. That true value is any quality that actually help life flourish, life of everyone, inclusive. That true value would only be realized in meaningful way when we have a different value regime in place, different value system or a structure in place. And to me, if you want to ask me what kind of value regime I'm think of, I would say look at the way nature works. Look at the way the indigenous people live. It's commons, living in commons. Something that I would like to call it the state of, or the communist state of, not communist, the communist state of living. And what are the features of that
We can talk later about that when we get into the job of alternatives. I don't think it's a mysterious thing. Most of the history of humans, we have lived under such systems, and we can reinvent them in the modern time. We live in commons. We still live in commons. When you live in your household with your partner and your children and your parents, you're not competing with each other. You're not charging each other or exploiting each other. I mean, theoretically, we assume we haven't adopted that capitalist mentality and incorporated into our personal life. It's not. We're not supposed to behave like that. So it's a household is a commons. You know, a friendship group is a commons. A lot of things are. If there is no commons, there won't be any life. Everything will end. With the capitalism is based on decommonization, exploiting commons, extracting values out of our commons. When we get involved with our friends on Facebook, which is a platform provided by capitalist corporations, as Zuboff says, we are actually creating a commons. We're creating value through these interactions, you know, sharing our selfies, sharing our stories, and so on and so forth. And you see those values are being extracted by the corporation, turned into products to be sold. You see that if there is no commons, there is no capitalism. There is no life. So commons are all around us. If we recognize. Now we can rebuild the entire society, the entire system, based on the commons. And then as two case studies, we have the first one that talks about Trump and Trumpism, and yes, anybody has read those readings? How many people have read the first one, Trumpism? It's a very long one, I know, and also possibly the second one. But one of the things that I normally do if I run out of time, when I go for a walk or I'm in a bus or somewhere, actually there is an app. I mean, you guys are much better than me in terms of technology. The name of the app is @voice. Anybody knows about that? So I put the link of the reading into that, and it reads it for me. Reads it out. So now I put it in my headphone, and I just go for a walk, and the whole reading is already read for me. If you just understand it, that should be enough, especially the non-academic ones. I guess it also does that to the PDF, but I'm not sure. But I guess possibly you can find apps that would do that as well. So if you really run out of time, you don't have really time to read the hard copy, you can use that app thing. It starts with talking about Trumpism, that Trumpism is more than Trump, it's a movement, and it has the support of, at least through the elections that we did, 40% of the American electorate, and so on and so forth. And Trump, one of the things that Trump did, and one of the good things about this article is that it shows the connections between Trump and the ideology of neoliberalism. We think that Trump was not neoliberal because he talked about a bit of a protectionism. He went in tariff wars, trade wars with China. He hated free trade, not because free trade was bad. He said free trade was not favoring America. And so on and so forth. So he distanced himself from the elite. He pretended that he is not a corrupt politician. He is a successful businessman who can run the economy successfully. And this again created that surface, that surface, and concealed his ties with the big corporations that donated to his elections and supported him, the big capital, and his conservative economic agenda. And the author, explores some parallels between the way he did that and the fascists or Nazi party in Germany, that they got rid of their socialist faction through the Night of Long Knives. They killed them. Yes?
I was just going to say, like, part of the whole like taking a Gramsci to the right
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
planting new ideas and new consensus, but not for change, but to protect.
Yep. And you see that, for instance, I listed some of the things that he did, and they correspond to neoliberalism. Like, for instance, he weakened the standards of the labor, workplaces, education, healthcare, environment, consumer protection. He made some careless appointments of the people from corporations into government jobs. He promoted kind of careless capitalist activities. He did the tax cuts for the rich and less government regulations. You see, these are the things that normally neoliberals promote. But he is mixing neoliberalism with authoritarianism. And some people say now we are into the an episode in the history of capitalism that neoliberalism becomes authoritarian. For people from Chile and people like in Chile, this is not news, right? This is not new. Neoliberalism has always been mixed up with authoritarianism. It might sound like new to Westerners, but not for the rest of the planet. So this has, I mean, and he also weakened the legitimacy of democracy. He questioned the elections, and he tried to manipulate the census and gerrymandered and so on and so forth. Okay, we have something. Okay, that's a very good question from Catherine. How would the co-op model go for an academic integrity? Yeah, I mean, a co-op model would definitely promote integrity, because I believe everybody, it would avoid the policy of publish or perish for academics. Under a corporate university, you have to maximize, you have to satisfy the metrics. Publish as many papers as you can, that they should be cited as many times as possible, and that would actually compromises the people's ability to generate original thought, and then you end up.
That's not exactly what I meant by that, and not hard in text. From my point of view, I could see that it would be more open to agendas that, unethical agendas. I could see that, to me it doesn't seem to work. I mean, I'm not having a go. I just, is there a university model of that, or tertiary education model of a co-op that you know of?
There are, but there are not that many. Yes. And in the past we were more cooperative. In the past we were electing heads of the schools and heads of colleges or faculties. Now they are appointed from outside and on very high salaries. But that's a different subject. Could we perhaps finish this discussion, and then you and me can perhaps have a conversation about that later, if that's okay?
Oh, that's okay. I'll
okay,
go
good.
after this.
Okay.
But I'm happy to do it over email or something. That's fine.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for your patience. Thanks. And for your understanding. Okay. So that's a bit of a summary, especially for those who didn't have time. And then the reading talks about, that, we normally think that only non-educated people vote for people like Trump, but, the author says about 50% of the white college-educated, especially male, voted for him. 63% of the white without college education, that amounts to 27 million, which you don't think, the author doesn't think they were racist, but they were desperate to go back to work and end the COVID restrictions, voted for him, and so on and so forth. So there's a bit of a discussion, or if you like, of the social basis of Trumpism.
I was just going to say, a it's a bit hard actually to say who really voted for him, because he also attracted a lot of like immigrants from like families who came over legal, like so quote unquote legally, and all that, who saw like those who could try and come in as the problem, that ones that had to like sell themselves as working up everything.
Okay.
And it's like a very mixed space. It's American politics. It's very, when it comes to these things, it's not as clear cut or obvious.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the absence of systemic thinking, in the absence of thinking about actually problems are rooted in the system, you are more inclined towards blaming the neighbor who looks different to you. Even immigrants can vote for people like Trump, because as an immigrant, I may come up with this idea that I deserve to come to this country. But the rest of my countrymen and women, they don't deserve. They're lazy people. They just want to come and enjoy life here, whereas I'm a hard worker immigrant. So you see, this system puts us against each other because we are not thinking of that, that the problems are actually rooted in the system itself. System is an abstract concept. It's not easy to grasp it. Whereas you can easily find a person in your neighborhood with a different skin color or different accent or different culture getting some handouts from Centrelink and think that they are actually the cause of problems. Not Microsoft that doesn't pay a cent in tax, right? So yes. And then the author talks about actually the coalitions between some sectors of white working class and the capitalist class. And that, for instance, there is a bit of a difference between those who donated to Biden versus those who donated to Trump. Those who donated to Biden are mostly coming from finance, insurance, real estate, communication, electronics, and defense. These are more mobile, except real estate. These are more mobile. I would also possibly be interested to see about tourist industry. These are more mobile. They make money out of globalization. So you see, this is a conflict between the interest of capitalists. So capitalists are not just united either. There are big factions and also fractions between them. So Trump supporters are mostly coming from energy, agribusiness, transport. These are less mobile. These are the ones that are more dependent on mining, for instance, on gas and oil. They don't want to go for renewable energy resources, especially by a government that actually wants to go for more renewable energy resources or greening the economy without actually saving those who lose their jobs because they're running budget deficits because they don't tax the rich. So you see that these Biden versus Trump. I mean, you may possibly remember me and my recommendation for you. Not only see the contrast, but also let's see the continuities, the connections. That the Trump is the byproduct of bad policies by people like Biden and Obama. It's not like, the era of Obama ends, all of a sudden a great portion of or sectors of the population get crazy and then they go and vote for Trump or because Trump deceived them and so on and so forth. No, there are continuation. The reason we have Trump, the reason we have ScoMo is because we have the Labour or the Democrats running the country in the wrong way. The reason we end up having Albanese is because of ScoMos. Right? So these are the connections. The reason the West is like the West or the global North is like the global North is because the global South is like the global South. And the reason the global South is like the global South is because the global North is like the global North. So see the connections. There are connections, causal connections. They're not just contrasts. Okay. And then, yes, the author also tries to explain, it's not that clear, but I tried to make it as clear. So I found 9 reasons or 9 causes, structural causes, for the rise of Trump or Trumpism. The white backlash to civil rights and black power of the 60s, 90s, politicization of the evangelicals in reaction to the cultural revolutions of 60s and 70s, the racist reactions to demographic changes that the white population is kind of in decline in the US. Not the case here in Australia, of course. American economic decline, internally and externally, the supremacy of American capitalism challenged, the decline of welfare state and public services, unions have failed to organize, working class abandoned by Democratic Party, casualization and precaritization of the workforce. You see, these are the list of things that I could pick up from the reading in terms of what caused Trumpism, the structural causes. And you see the footprints of the other party in this. The other party contributed to a lot of problems listed here. But then you ask, well, if a lot of these problems started from the 60s and 70s and these are the backlashes, why we didn't have the backlashes back then, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? Nothing. No Trump then. But then we had in 2016, 2010s, the rise of the far right in Europe, in America, and other places. And the author tries to explain that. Anyone remembers how the author explains why the backlash didn't come earlier?
I was just going to say, figures like Hillary Clinton and all that were just Trump was like just the obverse of them. He was their symptom of what was happening. Because they were sort of pushing forward, like with their very pro-globalisation and invading countries and destabilising. It's like it was easier to put all the emphasis on him away from what they were doing too.
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is something I hope we will find enough time to explore further and explain it further. The globalization aspect of it. Yes, remind me if we find some time. So anyone remembers how the author explains why the backlash didn't come earlier? Or what you yourself think? Why we didn't have Trump in the 70s, 80s?
Because conditions were more comfortable, so the worse economic conditions for the American public have made them more likely to resort to extremes on the political spectrum.
Yes, and the author says the families, the American families, households, and you can generalize it to the rest of the advanced world, they had the chance to, they increased their shifts, they worked more shifts and their women went to work more. So they could maintain the standards of the living. And the system allowed, because in the 90s, as the result of globalization, the author doesn't say that, as the result of globalization, new technologies being introduced, new opportunities were introduced, and it allowed households to work more. The 1990s is the Clinton was in power for most of it, is considered as the decade of go-go. And many economists thought the growth is going to be endless until the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, and then 2008 the GFC happened, and that ideology was debunked. So anyway, yes, the opportunity that people had. And another thing that the author doesn't say is, of course, the introduction of credit cards to the public, in the loans and debt, which extended the ability of people to live a little bit more comfortably until the GFC happened, and then, well, there was not much more room for progress, for maintaining the standards of living, and therefore it paved the way for the rise of Trumpism or far right. Again, please always be mindful of the continuities. You see the continuities, the connections.
Was it also, it could be said that the pushback of when people did try more radical things during those times of when things were starting to break down, and they did try to do, like, they start their own communities, and that the state will come in and sort of make sure it never got even further, like treat them as a threat.
in terms of, yeah, I mean, controlling the political situation. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, like.
Yeah, but then now, why we have this Trumpism? Why it could be?
Well, I think it's just something that's been building up over time. It's that gradual breakdown of public trust between people and the state.
Yeah, that has been also in decline. Yes, the public trust between people and the state. Okay. The second reading is completely different topic, but it says, how technology is changing and what are the consequences of these new technologies, especially when they are controlled and owned by the big corporations and the state. That is very much sided with them. And then, yes, it has spawned a new variant of capital. But this shouldn't be seen as a technological determinism. It's not like technology giving birth to another type of capitalism. What the author says is that capitalism getting its hand on new technology and reorganizing itself. You shouldn't go for technological determinism. Technology changes the society. No. The system make a new use of new technologies. Now, how actually this system works, again, you can think of the way that are formulated it, in terms of the commons and decommunizing us, but this is a different way. The author says that first, these technologies or the owners of the technology give free services to billions and we're happy. We join Facebook, we join Twitter and so on and so forth. Then they monitor us, the details of our activities, which are human experiences. They treat human experiences like raw materials, like the raw materials they get from nature. Now they get these human experiences as raw materials from human nature, right? And then transform them into behavioral data, which is kind of commodity, but it's not a material commodity, it's immaterial, it's digital, I would say, virtual. They use some of that data they get from us to improve their services. It's like when you go to a factory and the factory owner pays you some money, some wage, so to make sure that you come back tomorrow alive, right? And this is and then the portion of the value that the factory owners takes and doesn't give you, which actually comes from your work, is called surplus value in a Marxist or Marxian perspective. Now, the portion of the data that is not invested back to improve the service and taken away from us, that is the surplus, property or proprietary behavioral surplus, which will be fed to an advanced manufacturing process. The author calls machine intelligence. Now you can call it machine learning maybe. And then they produce products that are used to predict our behaviors at present and in future. What kind of behaviors, as consumers, even as political actors, they can actually see what kind of political view we may have, and then therefore they target us if they're paid by those political actors, or they can sell the data to those political actors that they did in terms of, perhaps you may remember the election 2016 and the role that Cambridge Analytica played. Now, so they trade with our behavioral future markets, and they have created a new market and a new way of creating wealth. And this is aligned with the evolution of capitalism. Capitalism started with simple production, then mass production. Henry Ford, right? Managerial capitalism, General Electrics. You appoint managers and they run the system. Finance capitalism then, and then now we have exploiting human experience of users. I prefer the term producer consumers or prosumers. So this is the, but don't see this as a linear progress. That doesn't mean we don't have mass production anymore. We don't have managerial. There are layers after layers. Okay?
I was just wondering if it's an immaterial commodity, how do you use some and then have a surplus that you haven't used? It's not like the data gets erased. You can use it both to improve your product and then also to become a part of the proprietary behavioural surplus that's then fed into the rest of the market.
Yeah, that's possibly partly technical, which I don't have the knowledge of answering. But the idea here is that if, for instance, these platforms were cooperative, I mean, it's absolutely possible. We have so many intelligent young people educated in technology, engineering, and it's not that difficult to come up with these platforms. These platforms are not like, you need Albert Einstein to invent them, right? It's just a platform, and then we can create them together. You can have platforms like Uber, but owned by the people, by the workers, by the drivers themselves. You just need some, primitive accumulation to happen. Some people put money together and do it. But then, in that case, all the data that would have been gathered, they would have been used in order to promote the platform for the sake and for the interest of the players, of the country, of the prosumers, not being taken away from them. And that taken away is that part that is taken away is the surplus. Okay. So surveillance as the business model of the internet, a new division of learning. That's a very interesting term. We have the word division of labor. Now we have division of learning, which means, in the division of labor, you work and I take the profit. In the division of learning, some of us are the watched and some of us are the watchers. So that's a division of learning. That's the core of this business model. And that's possibly an answer to one of the quiz questions. Okay, let me skip these. I mean, the rest of them are additional slides. And let's see if we can answer some of these questions in the very limited time I'm afraid we have. So what are the main structures? Can everybody see that? What are the main structural changes behind the rise of Trumpism according to Faber? I will give you some options, and maybe some of them are not, and some of them are the options, the right options. But I have listed 9 of them, I guess, for you. It's a lot of them are mentioned below the picture of Trump in that article. Have a look at them. What does Faber mean by dangerous social and political vacuum? Anybody remembers that? What political vacuum was created that was then filled in by Trumpism? Yes?
Was that the working class doesn't feel like they're being represented by the Democratic Party, who was supposed to be first like
Yep.
the Labour-focused party?
Yeah, and in this country we're very familiar with that idea that how the working class was abandoned by the Labour.
They were called the deplorables.
Yeah,
the working
yeah.
class, and it sort of galvanised that
Yeah.
reaction against the Democrats and all the liberal
Yeah.
establishment.
Yeah, well, the center left was supposed in theory to represent, but they don't. So according to Faber, why did the national right-wing backlash in response to the demise of the economy since the late 60s? I think we answered that, right? Why that backlash didn't come early. According to Faber, what Trump has done to conceal his ties, I think we discussed that. He distanced himself from the elite and he presented himself as an alternative and so on and so forth. I'm the man who does the job, so on and so forth. I'm your savior. What kind of new liberal policies did Trump continue to employ? I think, again, we discussed that. The tax cuts, lower regulations, the appointments, and so on and so forth. Which one of the following sentences describes Zubov's surveillance capitalism? I think I explained that process of how they may turn our human experiences into prediction products, something like that. So that process is if you pay attention to that in that slide or inside the article, why is that demanding self-regulation from surveillance capitalism will not fix the problem of democracy? Why demanding...
You can't act as your own third person, like you can't act as your own sort of watchdog.
Yes, it's like asking capitalism to be caring.
Yeah.
It's like asking Facebook to self-regulate. That would go against their logic of accumulation. So it creates contradiction. So you can't really do that. You have to actually go for, as you said, the new legislations. But we're about 2 decades behind them, unfortunately. And why does Zuboff use the term digital natives? You want to talk?
So I felt like it was because so that they could sort of make the point of the surveillance capitalists sort of like colonizing data and exploiting data usage to make their own profits.
Yeah, the parallels that the author makes between the exploitation of us, and the exploitation of the natives and the indigenous during the classical colonialism, right? So to highlight that similarities, the continuities, right? Which one of the following terms refers to the reality of extending power through the translation of everything into knowledge? She comes with 2 terms. One is automate, and the other one is she has invented informate. By informate she means turning everything into information and then making money out of that. Number 10, what does Zuboff mean by saying that surveillance capitalism automates us? When we are automated, what happens?
It's kind of that process of taking or extracting value out of the way that we engage.
Well, what happens in terms of our political abilities when we are automated? When you are automated, you lose your
free will and
yes.
ability to change. You just do the same thing. Or
Yes. Self-determinism, autonomy is gone. An automaton has no autonomy. It is a machine. It does what is coded into it. Number 11. What is the most anti-democratic about the nature of surveillance? Most anti-democratic. It goes back to the division of
power. There is a concentration of power.
No. Division of, not labor, division of learning, right? That's the, as according to Zuboff, that's the most anti-democratic, because it puts some of us in the place of being watched and the rest of us in the place of the watchers. That's the very core of it.
It's sort of create that thing of being gatekeepers.
Yep.
Of making sure people behave a certain way, do certain things as expected of them in that sort of as watchers.
Yep.
Whereas the watch don't have that sort of, it's not expected of them.
Yeah. Again, that's a new way of dividing the society. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your patience, and I'm sorry that I'm not giving you enough time for proper discussions. But let me know. You don't need to wait until the end of the semester when it's too late. I have to cover a lot, as you can see. But I don't know, possibly I can compress things further or skip some of the things to give you guys more time for discussion. But when the readings are read, of course, it's